Well, I think $100 silver, which we just broke through today for the first time ever, I think that's a much more significant milestone than when Bitcoin hit 100,000. You know, when they were celebrating the Bitcoin 100 party in December of 2024, if you just had sold your Bitcoin instead of celebrating and bought silver, you'd have 4 times as much money today. And that's a pretty good indication that 100 is not the end. It's really the beginning. And silver is headed a lot higher. And so now $5,000 gold isn't anywhere near where this is going. I mean, I don't really know at this point whether it's 20,000 or whether it's higher than that, but the bar has been moved substantially over the last dozen or so years based on all the money we've printed, all the debt we've accumulated. Of course, we're not done yet. Gold's not going to stop at 5,000. So the gains are just going to continue. The dollar's days as the world's reserve currency are numbered.
Silver has officially entered a historic era. As of January 23rd, 2026, prices shattered the triple-digit barrier for the first time, hitting an intraday high of $101.38 per ounce. This monumental 40% surge in just 3 weeks is fueled by deepening global supply shortages and the intense industrial demand of AI data centers. Meanwhile, gold is on the verge of its own psychological milestone, trading at a record $4,988 as investors flee to hard assets amid escalating geopolitical tensions. Renowned economist Peter Schiff, who famously predicted this shift decades ago, argues that $100 silver is merely the beginning of a massive monetary reset. In this breakdown, Schiff highlights how silver has recently outperformed Bitcoin by a factor of 4, signaling a structural move away from fiat currency and toward a gold-backed reality. He warns that with massive debt and continued money printing, $5,000 gold is no longer a ceiling, but a stepping stone to even higher valuations. But with silver already at $100, is it too late to buy? Or is the dollar's collapse about to accelerate? Watch to find out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and enable notifications for additional in-depth content. Thanks for joining us again. Enjoy the video.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think $100 silver, which we just broke through today for the first time ever, I think that's a much more significant milestone than when Bitcoin hit 100,000. Yet, there's no big silver $100 parties going on around the country. Nobody's really talking about it very much. And that's a pretty good indication that 100 is not the end. It's really the beginning. And silver is headed a lot higher. Gold, of course, is now about $30 away from 5,000. And if we don't hit it today, we'll probably hit it on Sunday night. When I first started predicting $5,000 gold publicly, it had, gone above 1,000. It was like 1,200, 1,500. Now, of course, I was making that prediction, 12, 13 years ago. And a lot of people, gave me a lot of shit because it didn't happen. Well, it's happened now. And sure, I made the forecast very prematurely. I didn't think back then that it would take this many years to get to 5,000. But the fact that it did take so long means that it's going a lot higher than 5,000, because I assumed when I first made that forecast that we would have a dollar crisis and it would cause that to happen, but would also put the brakes on all the deficit spending and the quantitative easing. But none of that happened. And so we got away with doing it for another dozen years. And so now $5,000 gold isn't anywhere near where this is going. I mean, I don't really know at this point whether it's 20,000 or whether it's higher than that, but the bar has been moved substantially over the last dozen or so years based on all the money we've printed, all the debt we've accumulated. And, even if you bought gold, when I forecast it to go to 5,000, even if you bought it back then, you still did better than if you stayed in the S&P. So it wasn't like my advice cost you money just because it took more years than I thought to get to 5,000. You still, tripled your money, which was better than you would have done over that same time period in the S&P. So it's not like it was bad advice. And of course, we're not done yet. Gold's not going to stop at 5,000. So the gains are just going to continue, and people who own gold and silver will continue to make more money than people who are just sitting in the U.S. stock market. Look, the rest of the investment community is finally beginning to figure out, right, what I've been, screaming from the rooftops about for 2 decades, right? I knew that this was coming. That's why I started buying gold and silver for my clients and myself back in 2000, 2001, when gold was under 300, when silver was under $5, right? So what's happening now, right? What's happening now does not surprise me, right? What surprises me is that it's taken so long, right? I saw this train wreck coming from so far in the distance that people began just calling me a stop clock and a perma bear because they didn't think the forecasts that I was making were panning out. They were panning out behind the scenes. But what's happening now is the mainstream is finally waking up to the reality of the fiscal and monetary situation that we're in and how it's going to end. There's going to be massive inflation, massive dollar depreciation, and the world is going to go back to gold and silver as the basis of our monetary system. I mean, Ray Dalio even said the same thing from Davos. He says that central banks are getting out of fiat, which means they're getting out of dollars. The monetary order is being reset. We're turning back the clock to prior to when the dollar became Bretton Woods, the reserve currency. We're going back to gold as the reserve. Bitcoin is flat on the year. It hasn't, I don't know if it's slightly up or slightly down, but it's basically flat. And, silver is up, I don't know, like, what is it year to date? 20, 30%?
35%, I think, already year to date.
No, I think it's 35. Now it's maybe up 40%. As of yesterday, it was up 35% in 2026. So now it's up about 40% in 2026. Bitcoin's doing nothing. And gold's up more than 10%. I'm not sure, 11, 12%. But it's only January. And so I think that the bottom is going to fall out of Bitcoin very soon. I posted on X today, when they were celebrating the Bitcoin 100 party in December of 2024, if you just had sold your Bitcoin instead of celebrating and bought silver, you'd have 4 times as much money today.
In this final segment, Peter Schiff warns that the current surge in gold and silver is the subprime blowup of our era, a massive warning sign of an impending sovereign debt and currency crisis. He explains that as central banks and investors ditch U.S. treasuries for real money, the era of the dollar's exorbitant privilege is ending. With interest rates rising despite Fed cuts and a major devaluation on the horizon, the cost of living is set to skyrocket. Is your portfolio prepared for the point of no return? Let's hear directly from Peter Schiff.
Yeah, well, I think we've kind of reached the point of no return where there is no viable path to solve the problem. And so the only politically expedient route is massive inflation. Whether that becomes hyperinflation, we'll see. But inflation is going to be the road that we're headed. And the dollar's days as the world's reserve currency are numbered. Right? The world has kind of made an informal decision to abandon the dollar. It started last year as central banks were accumulating gold. They're going to continue to accumulate gold. This year, more central banks are going to get in on it. And investors now are starting to realize that they need to hold gold and silver as opposed to U.S. treasuries. So the world is trading in their dollars and their treasuries for real money. And that is a game changer, especially for the United States. We've been living high on the hog with the exorbitant privilege of creating the world's reserve currency. That's enabled us to live beyond our means. That's kept consumer prices and interest rates lower than they otherwise would be. And it's allowed us to have this service sector, consumer-based economy. And it's allowed us to build up this massive, Defense Department that Trump is bragging about. So I think what's going to be happening this year and next year is a major devaluation of the dollar relative to other currencies. That's going to lead to a significant increase in the cost of living in the United States. So the affordability crisis is going to be far more extreme than it has been. And it's not just consumer prices, but long-term interest rates that are headed much higher. We're headed for probably the worst economy that we've ever had in this country. Whether there's a get-out-of-jail-free card somewhere along the way with AI, we'll see. But in the short run, we have massive headwinds coming from de-dollarization, decades of living beyond our means. We have to pay the piper, right? The chickens are finally coming home to roost. And that's what you're seeing in the gold and silver market, right? It started last year with gold, expanded into silver. It's in the mining stocks. All the alarms are ringing. It's just that most people don't understand, what they're hearing. They don't get it. Just like, I was short the subprime market. I was in on that trade. When it blew up in 2007, I knew that a much bigger financial crisis was around the corner, that subprime was just the tip of a massive iceberg. But the mainstream, Wall Street, the Fed, Ben Bernanke, were saying, don't worry about it. It's contained. It's no big deal. It's just subprime. That was the warning of the financial crisis. And I had been predicting it for years. And as soon as we had the subprime, then my warnings got a lot louder. And I was like, look, this is going to be a disaster. You don't know what's going to happen. The banks are going to fail. Fannie and Freddie are going bankrupt. I mean, I knew what was going to happen. It didn't take that long from the blow up in 07 to the crisis in 08. Well, I've been saying that what we've seen in the precious metals market is the equivalent of what the subprime blow up. It is forecasting a currency crisis, a U.S. dollar crisis, and a sovereign debt crisis. And you can already see the beginnings of that. The yields on 10-year and 30-year treasuries are now higher than they were before the Fed, started cutting rates.
7 consecutive rate cuts.
Yeah, and the same thing happened when Powell was cutting rates when Biden was still president. He cut 75 basis points, and the long rates went up 75 basis points. Now they've cut another 75 basis points, and long rates have gone up again. And so the bond market is not cooperating because the bond vigilantes realize how much inflation is in the pipeline, and they don't want to buy those bonds.
The storm is here. America's decades of unchecked borrowing and dollar dominance are finally hitting the wall, forcing a painful reckoning through runaway inflation and a crumbling reserve currency. Yet amid the chaos lies a historic opportunity. Gold and silver aren't just rising, they're reclaiming their ancient role as true money while fiat systems falter. Peter Schiff's long-held conviction is proving prophetic. Those who position themselves in precious metals now stand to preserve and multiply wealth as the old order collapses. The question isn't if the shift will happen, it's whether you'll be on the winning side when history turns the page. Share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you found this breakdown helpful and want to stay ahead of these historic market moves, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Your support helps the channel grow and keeps you informed when the markets shift next.